Welcome to part 1 of a two-part VOD which will walk you through the installation of Unified CCMP 852. This first part deals with the installation of the prerequisite software. In part 2, we will cover the installation of the core CCMP components themselves, as well as configuration and validation testing. Before we start, some housekeeping. The light bulb will be used to indicate a useful tip, the warning triangle will highlight particularly important information, and the fast forward symbol will be used when we have sped up the recording to save time. The deployment model we will be using is a dual-sided, dual-tier model. If you're going to follow the installation, you will need the CCMP 852 installation guide, the prerequisite software installation media, and the installation media for CCMP 852 itself. Specific details of the prerequisite software can be found in the installation manual. The starting point for our VOD is after the operating system has been installed. We're using Microsoft Windows Server 2008 R2. We need to make sure that all the prerequisite components are installed on the target servers. The first thing we're going to do is add the application server role to the web servers. To do this, we're going to use the Add Roles wizard in Server Manager. When you select the application server role, you will be prompted to add the dependent features. Click the Add Required Features button to add these. In the Select Role Services screen, choose Web Server IIS Support. You will again be prompted to add the dependent role services and features. Again, click Add Required Role Services to do this. Make sure that the IIS 6 management compatibility options are selected for the Web Server Role Services. You can now install the application server role. The same steps must be repeated to install the application server role on the B-side web server. Next, we are going to add the .NET 3.5 feature to the database servers. Just like we did with the application server role on the web servers, we are going to use the Server Manager. Choose Add Features and select .NET Framework 3.5.1 Features. Again, we are prompted to install the dependent role services and features. There are no changes we need to make here, so we can go ahead and install. The same steps must be repeated to install the .NET 3.5 feature on the B-side database server. We are now ready to install Microsoft SQL Server 2005 on the database servers. Note that although CCMP runs on the 64-bit version of Microsoft Windows Server 2008, we are using the 32-bit version of Microsoft SQL Server 2005. To install SQL Server 2005, launch the installer from the installation media and select Install Server Components from the menu. The SQL Server configuration check may issue warnings about IIS and ASP.NET. These prerequisites are only required if reporting services is going to be installed. This is a dual-tier installation, and so reporting services will be installed on the web server, and these warnings can be ignored. We're going to install the SQL Server database services and workstation components. CCMP does not support named instances, so we're going to choose default instance for the instance name. Choose the built-in system account as the login account for SQL Server services. And make sure both SQL Server and SQL Server Agent are selected to start automatically. Choose Mixed Mode as the authentication mode. Choose Latin 1 General and accent-sensitive collation settings. Now we are ready to start the SQL Server installation. During the Workstation Components installation, you may see a warning from the Program Compatibility Assistant. This can be safely ignored. After SQL Server installation completes, we need to install SQL Server Service Pack 4. If the Service Pack installation detects that some files are in use, you may need to reboot after installing the Service Pack. After the Service Pack installation completes, you can choose to launch the User Provisioning tool. This tool allows you to add users to the SQL Server Administrators group. If necessary, reboot to complete the installation. There are some configuration steps we need to carry out to complete our installation of SQL Server 2005. We need to configure the order in which protocols are used by client applications that will access this SQL Server instance. We're going to use the SQL Server Configuration Manager for this. Under Client Protocols, ensure that the order is Shared Memory, Named Pipes, and then TCP/IP. Under Network Configuration, ensure that Shared Memory, Named Pipes, and TCP/IP are all set to Enabled. Under SQL Server 2005 Services, restart the SQL Server service. By default, the Windows Server 2008 R2 firewall will not allow incoming traffic to SQL Server. If you're using the firewall, you will need to specify a rule to allow SQL traffic through. We can do this using Server Manager. In this example, we're using a port-specific rule for TCP traffic on port 1433. The SQL Server installation steps must be repeated on the Side B database. CCMP uses Microsoft SQL Server reporting services for audit reports. Next, we will install the reporting services components on the web servers. As we're installing the 32-bit version of reporting services onto a 64-bit Windows installation, we must configure IIS to support 32-bit applications. To do this, you can copy the command from the installation guide and paste into a command window. Make sure you choose Run as Administrator when you launch the command window. Launch the SQL Server installation program. You can safely ignore the compatibility warning. The system configuration check should report no errors and no warnings. Choose the reporting services and workstation components. As we did with the databases, choose Default Instance for the instance name. For the service account, use the built-in System Account option and ensure that Reporting Services is selected to start at the end of setup. When setup is complete, we need to install SQL Server 2005 Service Pack 4. As we do not have the database server component installed here, we can uncheck the User Provisioning Tool checkbox. It's a good idea to restart the server here to complete the installation. Once installed, we must configure reporting services and allow access for the local network service account and for the network service account of the other web server in our deployment. Start the Reporting Services Configuration Manager and connect to the local Reporting Services instance. Choose Report Server Virtual Directory and click New to create a new virtual directory for Reporting Services Report Server. You can use the suggested name of Report Server. Choose Report Manager Virtual Directory and click New to create a new virtual directory for the Reporting Services Report Manager. Choose Web Service Identity to create application pools for the Report Server and Report Manager. Click New to create a new application pool for each service and select Built-in Account, Local System as the security account for each application pool. Choose Database Setup to configure a database which can be used by reporting services. Enter the name of the Side A database server in the server name text box. This is where Reporting Services database will be located for the Side A web server. Click Connect and specify an account that has administrator permissions on the Side A database SQL Server instance. These credentials will be used to set up the database. Click New to create a new database. We can use the default options here. You'll be asked again to specify SQL Server administrator credentials to access the database and perform the database create. You can see in the left of the window that Reporting Services is now initialized. There are still a few more steps for us to complete before Reporting Services is ready for CCMP to use. Configure the Reporting Services execution account specifying the report execution user described in the required domain user account section of the installation guide. Now that we've successfully configured Reporting Services, we can use the Report Manager to configure Reporting Services security. The Report Manager can be accessed using a browser. The URL is the virtual directory that we specified for the Report Manager when we configured Reporting Services. In this case, it's localhost reports. First, we're going to grant access for the local network service account, as this is the account used by CCMP to access Reporting Services. Click New Role Assignment and enter the details of the local network service account. Grant each of the roles to the network service account. We need to repeat this process for each web server in the deployment, using the machine name $ convention to refer to the network service account on the other web server. When complete, you should see the new role assignments displayed on the Properties tab of Report Manager. Next, we're going to go to Site Settings and configure site-wide security to grant the system administrator and system user roles to the local network service account and the network service account of the other web server in the deployment. If successful, we should see the new system role assignments displayed. The SQL Server installation steps that we followed on the Side A web server must be repeated on the Side B web server. Remember to specify the Side B database server when configuring reporting services. And don't forget to add the Side A network service account when configuring reporting services security. Next, we must install the J2SE runtime environment on the Side A database server. For this release, we need version 6, update 11 of the runtime. Make sure that you have the 64-bit version. We also need to install the SQL Server management object. Again, make sure you have the 64-bit version. Repeat the Java and management objects installations on the Side B database server. This completes the prerequisite software installation for the database servers. Next, we will install the ASP.NET 2.0 AJAX extensions on the Side A web server. You can safely ignore the program compatibility warning. We must also install the Microsoft Web Services Enhancements version 2.0 Service Pack 3. You can choose the Runtime Only option. Repeat the web server prerequisites installation on the Side B web server. We've now installed and configured all the prerequisites for a CCMP 852 installation. In Part 2, we will install and configure the CCMP components themselves.